presenting to you what we've accumulated in terms of years of experience in undertaking capability-based planning. And through that learning, we've had the opportunity to simplify a particular method down to what we now call Jibility Steps, which is just a simple 6-step method. And so for this presentation, I'd like to take the opportunity to explain to you this simple capability-based approach for translating strategic vision and goals into a roadmap. And before we launch into that, let me just explain why we do that. In this presentation, we will talk about why capability-based planning, and how does that differ from traditional program project-based planning. Experience of undertaking this and how we came up with the method. And we will go into detail with a specific example. I'd like to just showcase a particular example. So it's not just talking about the theory of Jibility 6 steps, but also looking into a specific example and how you can apply this in an iterative incremental manner to create what I call a minimum viable strategic roadmap. And then finally, I'll show you how you could potentially use the 6 steps in a myriad of tools. So why capability-based planning? As a consultant, having done a lot of strategic road mapping type work with various clients around different places, it's very common to actually walk into a client and they would no doubt have some sort of a strategy that's been developed. Whether that strategy is, sometimes it's just a one-line statement, a vision of intent. Sometimes there's a whole document that articulates a strategy. And the reality is there's lots of different ways that organizations go about creating this strategy. And there's tons of books on it, right? But what's very common for most organizations is most organizations then struggle to translate that strategy into a plan. So what's the plan, Stan? And what we found is that a capability-based planning approach is a really great approach for bridging the gap between strategic vision and goals and execution planning. So when you apply a simple capability-based planning approach, that enables you to create a capability-based roadmap. So this is a high-level roadmap that can articulate how you're going to get from A to B to achieve your strategic vision and goal. And that high-level roadmap is a great starting point to get your stakeholders on board, the consensus building, as well as getting the agreement as to what's in scope and the timeline for when you can achieve it. And that's a really good input into then the more detailed execution planning. Right. So we think that a capability-based planning approach, and in particular a capability-based roadmap, is the bridge between strategic vision, goal, and execution planning. So why capability-based planning? So in my mind, there are 5 key reasons why capability-based planning works really well. One is that it really helps you to focus on what needs to change rather than jumping first into the solution. So it's actually not uncommon to see a lot of people when they have an outcome or a vision, goal that they need to achieve, they gather a bunch of people together into a brainstorming session and they just literally dream up or burp up a bunch of initiatives that they need to execute. And then from there, they try to then understand, well, if these are the initiatives that we need to execute, what's the capability that's going to change? Well, actually, capability-based planning approach takes a more capability-driven mindset to it, which is, let's look at what capability needs to change first. And then on the basis of that capability change, that's when we determine what initiatives or actions we need to take to make that change to the capability, not vice versa. The other reason for capability-based planning is that it helps us to shift away from a functional departmental view of the world. So we're not hung up about how we're organizing ourselves. We're looking at, irrespective of how we're organized, what capabilities do we actually have? What capabilities do we need to change? So you take a capability view of the world rather than a functional departmental view of the world. And it breaks down some of that silo mindset that a lot of stakeholders have, which is, hey, that's my function. I'm focused on just that function. Number 3 is build consensus with business stakeholders with common understanding of capabilities. So this is the common language thing. As an architect, when you can talk about capabilities with business in terms of business capabilities, then you can actually relate with the business stakeholders, and they can relate with you because you're talking the same language. And one of the beauties of a capability mindset and capability-based planning approach is that when you're thinking about capabilities, you're looking at holistically, what are all the capabilities that makes up that area that I'm looking at that needs to be analyzed? And that holistic view allows you to then make sure that you haven't missed anything in identifying what needs to change. A capability-based planning approach, number 4, helps us to also create a substantiated roadmap. Now, if you take a methodical, systematic approach to how you formulate what needs to change based on capabilities, and you're able to provide linkages of this back to the why you're making the change, then that will help you to create a substantiated roadmap. So back to my story at the beginning, if you just have brainstorming session, you're just dreaming up initiatives, it's actually very hard to substantiate. How did you come up with those initiatives? And the last point there is that a capability-based planning approach and taking capability viewpoint actually does help architects, enterprise architects in particular, to narrow in and know which area of capabilities I should focus on in taking the next step in doing the detailed modeling. Having done an enterprise architecture assignment in previous life, I'm on one of the culprits where in the past I would have gone into an organization and I may have gone about and tried and model the entire enterprise, current state and target state. By the time you finish that, the world's changed and you're forever trying to catch up. And I'm an advocate now that, hey, if you took a much higher level view and you formulated a business capability viewpoint first, and that's a great way to then identify, having seen which capability needs to change, that's the area that you potentially could dive into as an enterprise architect to model into the next layer of detail. So they're the 5 key points I think that is good to remember in terms of why capability-based planning. So let's have a quick walk through then what's the difference between capability-based planning and your traditional program project planning approaches. Now, this is just a very simple view of it. And in a traditional program project planning type mindset, you might start with what's the scope, and you may even determine what's the outcome we may need to achieve. And you would typically take a work breakdown structure, decompositional view, top-down view, and break that down into what's the work we need to do to achieve the outcome. And that work could be comprised of a series of projects if it's a program, or if it's a project and they're all just a bunch of tasks, and that might be broken down into finer things. So the mindset here is really about what work needs to be done. And with a capability-based planning approach, it's not dissimilar in the sense it's top-down. We also start with what's the problem we're solving for and what's the objectives that we need to achieve to solve those problems. But we're taking a different tack to it, which is we're not looking at what work needs to be done first. We're looking at, well, what capabilities have we got that needs to be changed, or what new capabilities would we need so that we can meet our objectives and solve our problems. So we're taking a very capability-based thinking to it first, rather than work-based. And it's on the basis of what capabilities that needs to change. That's what drives the formulation of what work would need to be done. So in the nutshell, the key difference really between what's a traditional program project sort of decompositional view, how you formulate that, and a capability-based planning approach is one's very focused on what work needs to be done, the other's focused on what capability change needs to be done. So we took that sort of line of thinking and said, okay, well, what if you could combine these two from a top-down, bottom-up approach? What if we took a capability-based approach that's top-down, and then you fed that up in a bottom-up approach with a program project planning line of thinking? That's really the basis of how we derive what we now call Jibility Steps. So Jibility Steps are made up of 6 steps: challenges, objectives, capabilities, actions, initiative, and roadmap. And you can see how they correspond to this diagram, which is that challenges aligns to what's the problem we're solving for. Objectives are what's the outcome we need to achieve. Capabilities are capabilities. And out of there, when you formulate a list of actions, you can then feed that in a bottom-up approach to a project formulation mindset, which is given the work we need to do to make changes, capabilities, how do we then group these into packages of work that we call initiatives that could ultimately land on a roadmap that we can execute? So that's really how we came up with the Jibility 6-step method. So as a consultant, as I mentioned before, and having engaged with different stakeholders and business, we've previously applied lots of different methods to how we go about doing this type of work. And one thing we notice is that, hey, we start to engage, as Christine described, partnering with business people on formulating strategic type work. If we start talking to them in lingo and languages that's based on our favorite method, and that's not in language that they understand, then it adds complexity to that engagement. So if we start talking about motivational models and value driver trees and Archimate notation and all that, to be honest, most business people, they couldn't care less. So what we decided to do was actually simplify that down into what we now call Jibility Steps, which is 6 simple steps in language that hopefully business people can understand. And so therefore we can be on the same page in terms of what needs to be done. So these are the Jibility 6 steps. And you'll notice that we don't capture here, and we don't have a first step, which is what's your vision and goal. As I said at the outset, everyone captures that and defines that differently. And so what we do on the other hand is we start by asking, whatever your vision and goals are, what's stopping you from achieving it? What's the challenges that you face, whether that's a problem or an opportunity? And then what's the outcomes or objectives you will need to achieve so that you can address those challenges? And by being able to play back those challenges and objectives, you're playing back an understanding of why we're doing what we're doing. And then in the middle, the 2 capability and action step, that's all about analyzing, well, what is it we need to change in the organization if we are to meet our objective and solve our challenges? And then finally, we have initiatives and roadmap, which is then about packaging up the actions into manageable chunks of work that we can then prioritize and lay onto a roadmap to visualize for our stakeholders how we're going to go from A to B. And that's the Jibility 6 steps. So to elaborate that a little bit further, this diagram shows the relationships of the information between each of these steps. And this is a really simple model. And in essence, for each challenge that you formulate, you'd ask yourself the question, what's the 1 or maybe 3 objectives that you would need to describe that would help me to address that challenge? And for each objective that you formulated that's required to address a challenge, which capabilities would be required to actually meet that objective? And for the capability that's described to meet the objective to solve that challenge, what specific actions would you need to take for that capability to meet the objective to address that challenge? So you can see from challenge all the way to actions, it's that top-down, capability-based driven approach where the actions are completely driven by what capabilities need to change to meet the objective to solve the challenge. And of course, you can go about and just execute all those actions, but the reality is that you'll probably end up with hundreds and maybe even thousands of actions. It's not that manageable, right? Which is why we brought in the bottom-up project program planning approach, which is then to go, how do we then group these actions into packages of work that we can easily manage? And so here we're now assigning actions into our initiatives, and each of the initiatives are potentially prioritized and then laid out onto a roadmap. So that's the methodology of the Jibility 6 steps. And it would be good now for me to walk through how would you apply it in the real world. So before I dive into the detail of this example, let me set the scene, the context. Red Jabber is let's say it's a fictitious organization. They're a traditional toy manufacturing company, and they are a wholesaler that's more used to just selling it to a local retailer who then go about selling it to customers, than dealing with customers directly. They're a very conservative organization, but they've got a grand vision, which is to reach the heart of every child through imaginative play using their natural toys, natural way. And they're seeking to expand globally, and they're embarking on a 3-year digital transformation program to achieve this. So not unlike a lot of organizations, they may even have a one-page strategy on a page that looks like this. As I said, you go from one customer to another. Some people have just a one-line vision statement. Some people have an entire book. Right or wrong, we're not here to judge Red Jabber. They've got this one page that articulates what's their strategy or vision. They articulate here their drivers, which is, hey, they want to obviously survive and be profitable, and they want to impact generation and generation of kids. They want to be sustainable, not only economically, but environmentally, but also to be seen to be a fun and engaging sort of product company. They've identified that there are 5 key strategic imperatives. Firstly, they need to market their products through digital channels. They need to then respond by having automated manufacturing processes to be able to meet the volume demand that they anticipate. They also think they need to diversify the workforce because, being a traditional toy manufacturing company, they've got an aging workforce and who don't really understand much about the younger generation and what they're looking for. They're hoping to grow, and finally, of course, they want to create appealing products. And then on the bottom there, they've articulated some of the common business problems they face, including, some of their toy retailers that they've noticed they've all shut shop because most people buy things online now. So I hope that's helped to set the context, right? So let's go through the Jibility steps in that context. So if we were to formulate what's the challenges that Red Jabber face, what they would go about doing is to list what's the challenges we face in order for us to achieve that vision in the next 3 years. And they may have formulated 40, 50 different challenges. But what we typically then do is we prioritize this when we bubble up to the top, the list of the challenges that we feel can be achieved within the time horizon, 3 years. And in this case here, again, we're not here to judge Red Jabber. They formulated these 6 key challenges they feel they need to solve for. And not surprisingly, they've articulated that there's a lack of a digital transformation leadership capability in their organization. Their organization is still stuck in old practices, and there's not much of a digital culture in their organization. Their manufacturing processes are very labor intensive. And as we mentioned earlier, they're still marketing as a wholesale and have little to no online marketing capabilities. They currently do not collect much information or data in order to make decisions. And lastly, they are very traditional organization that's quite rigid in how they do things. So a lot of challenges in both people, process, and physical in terms of what they need to solve in order to transform. So that's the first step done in the Jibility step. We formulated a set of challenges we need to solve for. So when we jump into the next step, which is objectives, here we're tasked with articulating. Here on the left-hand side, we can see there the 6 challenges that they formulated earlier. Now we're tasked with simply articulating what's the 1 or 3 objectives that we can formulate that will help us to solve each of these challenges. And so the first one is, hey, we need to appoint a digital transformation lead and get that done within the next 3 months. The next one is we need to raise the digital competency across the whole organization to at least level 2. So that'll be the European digital competency framework that they're applying here. And if you look further down, there's objective number 5, which is, hey, we need to have online sales making up 70% of our overall sales. And that's the objective we would need to achieve if we are to address the challenge that we know that we are actually now an online retailer, which is the challenge number 4. So in the objectives, we're simply listing 1 to 3 objectives that we can link to each of the challenge that we have articulated. So challenge and objective, that's fairly straightforward, right? Business people can understand this. Now we move on to capabilities. In the capability step, what we're tasked to do is then to map out what are the capabilities that makes up this organization. Now, because of real estate on a PowerPoint slide, I'm not going to put the entire capability map onto the screen, and it's probably too much detail anyway. What I have done is I've just taken a snippet of the capability map for Red Jabber, and here you can see that across the marketing to customer success value chain, the capabilities are marketing the product, selling the product, manufacture the product on demand, order handling, shipment, pick, pack, dispatch, and then finally supporting the customer along the after sales support. So with a capability map like this, we can not only describe what are the level 1 capabilities, but we can also describe within it what's the sub capabilities, if you like, that makes up, say, marketing management. So here we've got customer experience, campaign management, brand management. All of these makes up marketing management. So in Jibility way of thinking, what we do is we not only map the capability, but we also describe what's the change. Is there change required? And we use this color coding as a heat mapping method to describe what's the change. So if it's blue in color, it means no change required. And if it's gray, it means it exists today, but in the next 3 years, the time horizon, it's not required anymore. So it's a deprecated capability. And if it's a yellow color capability, then it's a capability that exists today, but there's a lot of other change required to it. If it's orange, it means it exists today and there's a medium level change. And red, if it's a high level change. And then finally, purple in color, they simply say it's a new capability. We don't have this at all. So through this color coding, we can see on a capability map the current state and the target state in one very simple viewpoint. Now, this does not take away the need in some organizations where enterprise architecture is done to a degree where you may want to do a current state capability map and a target state capability map and try and map the transition between one another. This is meant to be just a very simple, high-level, quick snapshot of what's the capability behind what needs to change. It's at a level that you can engage very quickly with business stakeholders to understand what needs to change. And one of the important things we do in how we approach capability mapping is that we link our capabilities to our objectives. And you can see here, customer experience is linked to objective number 5, and that's what that little tag here represents. And you can see that number 5, objective number 5, well, that's the one where online sales are over 70% of overall sales. So it's very important for us to actually link the capability to an objective, because that's how we identify, well, which one of these capabilities is actually fundamentally required so that we can meet our objectives and ultimately to address our challenges. So you can see then that we've got a few other capabilities, and some of them are even linked to more than one objective, and that can happen, of course. So on the basis of those capabilities that are linked to an objective and have been articulating as needing to change, those are the ones we need to focus our attention on. And they're the ones we need to then describe what actions we would need to take then for that capability that's linked to an objective. And you can see that although we've described that campaign management needs to change because it's an orange in color, we haven't linked to any objective, and maybe we're missing an objective, or maybe we haven't got around to it. But if that is in fact true, is not required to meet any specific objective, then we know that even though we've captured that one of the stakeholders said it needs to change, we may not spend any time trying to elaborate what that list of actions are for that capability, because doing so is just a waste of time because it's not going to help to meet the objective to solve the problems. So that's how simple it is in terms of where we should focus our attention for elaborating the capability, which takes us to the next step. Now, before I do that, let me just dive very quickly into what do we mean by business capability in the context of what makes up a capability. And I know there are different viewpoints on this, so this is how I would look at it in terms of what's a business capability. We know a business capability, depending on who you talk to, it's the building blocks in an organization that describes what it does, right? And when we think of a business capability in a classical sense, we often think about, well, who are the people involved in that business capability? What processes they use to do what they do, and what physical tools they use to do what they do. As I said, that's a classical view. The reality is that in the more modern view, there's a multi-dimensional view of what's a business capability, and information certainly is an important component to it. What information do they use to do what they do? And maybe even what technology they use, or where are they located, and what culture is it, and what's the organization. And you notice I've left it open here because the reality is there may be other dimensions that you may need to consider. Security might be one that comes to mind for me. Using this sort of framework, it's a really good technique for how you go about formulating actions. So how we go about it is that in the action step then, for a capability customer experience that's linked to objective number 5, so customer experience is a new capability because it's purple in color, and it's linked to objective number 5. And so the question is, what do we need to do to establish customer experience as a capability so that we can meet objective number 5, which is that online sales are over 70% of overall sales. And how we do that is to ask the question, what do we need to do for that capability when we're considering what's the people actions that we need to think about? What's all the process actions we need to think about? What's all the physical actions? So what people actions are required for establishing customer experience as a capability to meet objective number 5? What process actions will we need to think about? So this is a really good framework then to help you to ensure coverage, to have considered all the possible actions that are required to meet objective number 5 to establish that capability. Now, I've only listed some of the actions here based on this dimension. Maybe some of these dimensions are not relevant, don't matter. Maybe we haven't got around to finishing it all. But here are some examples. We need to appoint someone who's going to be the customer experience lead. We're going to design the customer experience operating model. We're going to implement the new customer experience operating model. We're going to map the customer experience digital future. And then we're going to implement a tool that how we map that. So they're just examples of some of the actions that may have been formulated as things we need to do, the actions we need to do to establish that capability to meet objective number 5. So that's what we would do in the action step. Now, you do that for all the capabilities that are linked to an objective, and you may end up with a visual map that might look like this. And that simply saying, hey, customer experience, what's made up of all these actions, and customer relationship management, well, that's made up of all these actions, and so on, right? So that's just an example when you do that. So we move on then down to the initiative step. And as we said earlier, in the initiative step, we formulate a list of actions based on the capability. Then we're tasked with, well, how do we then group these actions into initiatives, package of work? And here's the example again for customer experience, which is made up of a list of actions. And now all we're doing is saying, well, which one of these actions fall into this piece of work? And we're just simply assigning the action to a package of work. Now this is the part where it can be a little bit of an art form as much as a science. It's a bit like in project planning, where there's somewhat of an art form sometimes in actually how you group activities and tasks together that can be manageable in terms of when you execute it. So what you have to do is group these related actions into packages of work and then give that package of work a name, and that would form your initiatives. Now, Jibility specifically is a generic method. In terms of what you define as an initiative, well, it all boils down to the granularity of what you define as to whether an initiative is in its own right a program of work, or an initiative is a project, or an initiative is just an activity. So if you think about Jibility Steps, if you apply that at a board level for a large organization, then the initiatives could ultimately be a program of work. This could be a 10-year plan with 50 initiatives, and each one of these initiatives is a program of work. If you apply that at a business function level, then the initiative could be a project. You apply that to a team level where you're just doing the next 3-6 months of planning, well, that could be just a set of activities, right? So Jibility can be applied at all those levels, and how you define in terms of granularity of the actions for the capability, and when you group it into an initiative, that determines whether it's a program of work, initiative, or project, and so forth. So having formulated a bunch of initiatives, then it might look like this. All the actions that have been grouped into various packages of work that we call an initiative. And now I don't have time today to talk about how we would go about prioritizing all these initiatives, but you can certainly do that. And then having prioritized these initiatives, then you can finally then lay that out onto a roadmap that might look like this. And I say it might look like this because clearly lots of different ways of visualizing a roadmap. This is just how we prefer to visualize a roadmap. And in essence, what this style roadmap is showing me is an initiative is just represented as a dot, and that dot is analogous to a milestone on a Gantt chart, and it's simply showing me when do I need that initiative delivered by. It's not showing me when does it start. It's not showing me how long it's going to take, because at this sort of high level of planning, there's no way I know how long it's going to take to deliver this initiative. All I need to know is when I need it by. So this style roadmap helps me to understand what's the scope of all the initiatives that I need to deliver over the 3-year time horizon, so that I can build those capabilities to meet the objectives and solve the challenges. And what's the sequence that these initiatives must be delivered in? So what's the bouncing ball for how we're going to get there? And that's the style of roadmap that we prefer to use. And it's a high-level strategic roadmap as opposed to an implementation plan. So when you've actually done that and you follow those steps of Jibility, from challenges to objectives and so forth, all the way to the roadmap, and you follow that and you link those steps along the way, what you're ultimately able to do is create a substantiated roadmap. See, if I now work backwards, well, that little dot there is the initiative called customer experience mapping. And that's customer experience map. And it's made up of these 3 actions. And those actions will derive from a capability called customer experience. And customer experience is linked to this objective, and that objective is required to solve that challenge. So that's how we create a substantiated roadmap. So the stakeholders will go, hey, well, how come that initiative on that roadmap? Well, let me explain. Following the 6 steps to Jibility, because everything's linked, you can explain it. You can substantiate why that initiative on the roadmap, right? So let's talk about this iterative incremental approach to creating a strategic roadmap. As much as I've explained the Jibility steps are being sequential, Jibility steps can in fact be executed in this iterative incremental way. And this diagram shows how you can do that. It's not surprising in some organizations who use Jibility steps as a way of actually creating a roadmap that they start with initiatives. As much as I don't like the idea that we should formulate initiatives on the basis of just doing brainstorming session, the reality, pragmatically, it still happens. Executive come out of the workshop and hey, here's 50 initiatives we've just dreamt up, we need to execute. So you as an architect now could potentially start from initiatives and actually work backwards to go, okay, those are the initiatives that we said we have to deliver, and these are the actions that's required for those initiatives. Well, which capabilities will actually help us to deliver to, which objectives that help us to meet, and what challenges are solved for? And sometimes you end up with a really good substantiation of why not those initiatives, because actually they don't seem to help us solve those challenges after all. So if you apply this iterative incremental approach to creating a strategic roadmap, then the way that I prefer to work is that rather than actually start with challenges and perfecting the list of challenges, then move to objectives and perfect that list of objectives and so forth, a better way to work is actually to simply list the challenges that, to the best of your knowledge, that's the list of challenges and it's good enough. Now move forward. And then articulate the list of objectives that, to the best of knowledge, that's all you can articulate for now. Move forward. So you push forward as soon as you've got something on paper, and you keep pushing forward, and ultimately you've got a scratching of a roadmap. And you may decide to cycle through this a few more times. And if you do that, then you may end up with what I call a minimum viable strategic roadmap. It's good enough that you can actually share with your stakeholders to gather feedback on. And it might be good enough that that's, to the best of our knowledge, that's how we're going to execute. As we know, you can spend months doing this type of work, but the reality is once you've got that, a few weeks down the track, the world's changed. Something would happen, and you've got to come back and make changes. So it's better to get something quickly out the door so that you can get feedback and gain understanding from stakeholders, and then be able to adjust and adapt your roadmap along the way. And so this iterative incremental approach, I think, is the better way of applying the Jibility steps than a purely sequential way of doing them. So how can you actually do this? How do you follow Jibility steps? What sort of tools can you use to do that? Now we have this canvas that you could use, and you can print this as a A3 sheet, a poster, and you can actually scribble in here my list of challenges, objectives, and so forth. And I've got a little example here, and again, because of the PowerPoint slide real estate, I've broken it up into several slides just to show you. Now, in this example, using the Canvas approach, this is Red Yabba's IT strategic roadmap. This is the IT strategic roadmap in support of their digital transformation roadmap. And so here they've got challenges, which includes, the business seeking to for digital transformation leadership from IT. Oh, gee, interesting. And we list the objectives here, and you can see how we can provide the linkage between objectives and challenges by simply putting in brackets, hey, that objective, or that's linked to challenge number 1, or that objective, that's linked to challenge number 2. And then when we come to capabilities, we can list the capabilities that's required to meet each objective. So IT leadership capability, that's required to meet objective number 1, and it's a medium level change, and so forth. So we can actually list the capabilities that are required, which objectives do they help us to meet, what's the level of change. And for each of those capabilities, we can then simply list, well, what's the action required for that capability to meet that objective, to solve that challenge? And we can do that here like so. And once we've done that, we can then formulate the list of initiatives. So this is really then just reorganizing that list of actions into package of work that we call initiatives. And we've done that here. So all the actions that was formulated, then just now regroup into package of work. Once we've got this, we can now lay that down onto a visual representation of a roadmap. So that roadmap could look something like this, right? So again, the style and how you present that roadmap is really up to you. And this is just our preferred way of how we represent a roadmap. And so those verticals are what we call stages, and the horizontals are what we call themes. Another way of doing this, and thanks to COVID, products like Miro, Miro, whiteboard collaboration tools have become extremely popular. And some of our consultants use these tools and because of working mostly remotely. And so what we can do is represent, as per this example, the 6 steps of Jibility as a frame within the collaboration board. So in the top there, we've got challenges. And if I was to dive in and have a look at what the challenge frame might look like, it could look something like this. And here we also use this as a collaboration workshop tool. So you can see here that we've got a 30-minute a time box that enables stakeholders to participate in the formulation of challenges. And we've got these post-it notes that they can drag onto this canvas area to articulate. Above the line are the opportunities, or above the water, opportunities, and below the water, they're the problems, right? So what's stopping this boat from sailing along and reaching its destination? What's the problem? What's the opportunities? So we can then list all these challenges in a collaboration board. And now these collaboration boards are really great for brainstorming these specific steps and collecting the information, but ultimately someone's still got to summarize it and put it into something that's more succinct and that can be articulated to everyone. So this is a really good place to start to create that content, but you may want to then harvest from this and put it into a PowerPoint deck, another tool, or whatever that you may want to use. Which leads me to my last point here, which is that, yes, there is a dedicated tool for doing this. As Daryl mentioned earlier, I'm a co-founder of Jibility, and there's a tool called Jibility, and there's a free plan, free license that you can use to do and follow the 6 steps Jibility to derive a strategic roadmap. And by all means, go there and check it out and see if it works for you. By the way, Jibility as a step is simple, and simple enough that you don't actually have to use a dedicated tool. You can actually use PowerPoint if you want to. So wrapping it up now, I'm almost spot on time. In summary, I think the capability-based planning approach is a great way to bridge the gap between strategy and execution planning. And that the important thing is that with a capability-based planning approach, that initiatives are actually derived from capability change, not vice versa. And that's the most important point out of this, is that we should be deriving what initiative, what work we need to do on the basis of capability, not the other way around. And Jibility Steps is a simple 6-step method that we've created for the basis of doing capability-based planning. And the way that things are linked in Jibility Steps helps us to substantiate the initiatives on our roadmap. And finally, Jibility Steps is simple enough that you can actually apply it using simple things, a sheet of paper and pencil, to a dedicated tool such as Jibility. So that's it from me, and thank you very much for the opportunity to share about what we've created in terms of Jibility Steps, and I hope this is something that you find useful and that you can actually apply in what you do yourself.
Great, thanks, Jen. I appreciate it. Great presentation. I just sort of bring up a comment that was made by strategic architects. So 6 steps makes a lot of sense, and I like how you can show the linkages between those 6 steps. So yeah, obviously resonating with the audience. Yep, absolutely. And it does actually remind me of some work I did a couple of years ago that had a what I called, I think at some stage I called it a linkage diagram, and other stages I called it a strategic alignment diagram, which was exactly this sort of concept. So taking the business drivers of the organisation and flowing it through to the initiatives that needed to be run and intersecting with the principles and values of the organisation at the same time. It's always a handy way to show those linkages, and I see you've done sort of something similar with this tool, which is great. Just some questions that have come in. There was one about what would you describe as the key successes that you've had in the use of this approach or this tool?
I think the key success that's come back from a lot of people who've used this tool is just that substantiation factor, right? One of the challenges as an architect in working with business stakeholders is, sometimes you're often asked to explain why that initiative. And the difficulty is not being able to defend those initiatives in a way that is in language that's simple enough to explain back to business stakeholders. And because Jibility Steps is just 6 steps and it's in language that business stakeholders can understand, the key success then is when business stakeholders then ask why that initiative. Well, let me explain. Just as that diagram I showed you earlier, that can actually show that linkage back. That initiative is on the roadmap because it contains these actions. We said that this capability needs to change to meet that objective, solve that challenge. It's as simple as that, right? And prior to that, we would have all sorts of different architecture models. We'd have to throw this model and them and this model. It's just too much detail, too hard to explain, right? And I think that's one of the key reasons why Jibility works. So as much as the key factor is the ability to explain back to business stakeholders, it's also how quickly you can derive something in order to sometimes just challenge your own thinking and go and iterate again, right? And it's so easy to do that. And that enables you to evolve your thinking as well. So sometimes you might be in capability step and you're formulating some capabilities and you've got some objectives and you go, oh, well, what's going to help me solve that objective? Oh, I must be missing some capabilities, or vice versa. Well, what's the capabilities I need then to solve this? So it helps you to think through. Because of that linkage, it helps you to identify what's missing.
So in terms of getting a sense of scale of how you can apply this sort of framework and approach and tool set, what sort of organisations are we talking about? Is this something that fits more with the very large organisations, or does it scale down practically to smaller ones as well?
Yeah, so that's actually very surprising and very interesting to me, is that we've found that some people have used Jibility, as I said, to do 10-year planning at a board level. And you think about it, the 6 steps are fairly generic, so it shouldn't matter where what we're articulating is initiatives, a large program of work or a smaller piece of work. So we definitely have people who've used Jibility at the board level, a large multinational, down to a small not-for-profit who had 3 or 5 people in the organization. One comes to mind where originally, talking about the tool we built to support this, the tool actually supports things like estimation of, ballpark estimation costs. We rounded those numbers to $1,000 as the lowest estimate per activity or action, sorry. This not-for-profit organization had their estimates at $100, $200, $300. We had to change a product to support them because, I never anticipated someone would use it at that sort of level. But clearly it shows that Jibility as a method can be applied whether it's up here or down here.
Very good. Elnaz just commenting, thanks for the presentation, very great. So thanks for that comment, Elnaz. And yeah, it certainly was. And just a question then, it is I think possibly a deceptively simple looking approach, 6 steps, very colourful, easy to understand terminology. What do your user profile look like in terms of tool adoption? Who's using this and how are they using it?
Yeah, that's actually a very good question. Recently, we did a study into the people who have been using Jibility to try and understand the persona of the people that are using it. And so we see clearly 2 camps. We see the architects and consultants, so consultants with an architecture discipline background who are using this. And they're using this predominantly not to replace their enterprise architecture tools, but as a great front-end tool to quickly grasp and engage with business and grasp an understanding of what's the problem solving for, what's the change we need, and what sort of work we need to do to establish that for our business stakeholders. On the basis of that, we'll go and model that in our architecture tool, right? So that's one side. The other side is the other user camp are VP level type people. And you think about it, they're the people who are tasked with making changes in the organization. And now they are tasked with making changes in the organization. For whatever reason, they may not be engaging with the traditional planning people, whether it's in IT, enterprise architects, or so forth, and they decide they want to do it themselves. And how I'm going to do it myself, I'm Googling, how do I do a strategic roadmap? Oh, they come across Jibility Steps. That looks simple enough. Let me give that a go. So the other camp that's using Jibility are VP type people who are tasked with making a change in the organization.
That's great. It reminds me of some work I did a few years ago with an organization that was trying to sort of take the architectural approach and thinking styles back into the business environment and help people understand how you go about thinking about the organization in that way, how it's structured, how it works, how it can change. So you're seeing that sort of adoption that executives are starting to think differently about how to look at their orgs?
Yeah, so the executives certainly are very comfortable with the formulation of challenges and objectives. And the area I think that the executives probably have not had much exposure to initially is this idea of a capability-driven sort of mindset. You know, it's not uncommon for executives who are outcome-driven to just want to dive into what's the work I need to do to get this done, which is, you know, the sort of project program planning mindset. So when they come to Jibility and they start to realize, oh, how did I come up with the initiatives that I need to do? I literally came up with it on the basis of what I think needs to be done, as opposed to a methodical mindset of what do I need to change to make this happen? And so that's where I think some of the executives starting to realize the power of Jibility when they start to think that way. And it is working in that extent. So I've got a customer who's in a VP marketing type role, and she's actually managed to create a substantial roadmap and facilitate the executives the rest of the executives in the team to create a roadmap. And it clearly does show that if you make this simple enough, then business people can actually do this to some extent, you know. And it does take a mindset shift to some extent, but there are other business executives, the analytical ones, would definitely grasp this very quickly.
That's great. It did make me wonder whether or not you could introduce an alternative if they're not familiar with capabilities, whether you could introduce, say, substitute in business functions as a mechanism.
Well, yeah, certainly you can certainly do that. I mean, to be honest, as much as I'm an advocate for capability-based planning, capabilities, hey, I'm one, I call myself a reformed enterprise architect. I won't get too hung up around whether this capabilities is strictly a capability or not a capability. Is it named correctly or not? Let's not get there. Let's not go there. What's more important about is identifying what needs to change, whether you call it a function or it's a capability. If we can pinpoint that's the thing that needs to change, that's all that matters, right? So if you decide to actually list the functions that needs to change in order, that's fine with me. If this is the function that helped me meet that objective, solve that challenge, and these are the actions required of that function, good enough. Obviously, if it's a more capability-centric view, which is looking at it from a people, process, information, technology, all those dimensional view, that's, for us in the architectural space, when we get it, so we're more willing to embrace that holistic thinking. But if a business person already starts to apply this, they miss the nuances of people, process, physical, and all those, it doesn't bother me. Right?
I wanted to interject because I caught the last of hi Daryl, hi Ted. I actually just wanted to ask a question and whether you saw the Jibility tool set as it links to initiatives helping in more detailed design decisions, more giving more accurate results in how to compare and contrast options at the solution level, at the initiative level itself. Are you seeing that people are starting to take those capability objectives pieces? So two questions. One, are you seeing it more being used at the solution level? And two, are you seeing it get pulled into the customer journey persona type levels and related in that way?
Yeah, I see that. I see people deriving initiatives on the basis of capability change, which helps them to focus the attention on where I need to focus my attention on solutionizing this change rather than solutionizing the change up front. So there's another school of thought, if you like, that sort of goes from, if I have this challenge and objectives, I need to formulate a course of action up front. So this sort of almost diving into what's my solution up front, whereas this is all about deferring the solution formulation until later.
So you've read my presentation already. Well, yeah, we call that the last responsible moment, which is a phrase that I got from Chris Cooperbland. But we've been bouncing about, and it is interesting how late you can make decisions if you are focused on this kind of thing. What's the sort of largest application that you've seen of this, in the sense of the number of people using it, and what were their challenges? How did they overcome those challenges? How did you help them overcome those challenges?
We're still in our early days in terms of our product. As a method, we've been applying this for many years now.
Yeah.
And so our own consulting company, that's the methodology we apply. And we've certainly applied that to large multinational organization down to the small organization. So we know that it as a method works, and we've certainly been successful in applying as a method across multi-functions with large global companies, and so that's well proven. It surprises me because it's just a simple method. I think the reason why it's so applicable, irrespective of which industry, irrespective of which level of an organization, these 6 methods is just as applicable. So there's no barrier, I think, to using this in any organization, because fundamentally what these 6 steps is all about is, if you've got a need to make a change, follow these steps to understand and articulate what you need to do to go from A to B. Right. So, one of the first customers that bought our product is a large oil and gas company. I can't name them, but it's a large oil and gas company. And one of the beauty and one of the reasons why I love the product is they were able to then substantiate back to the stakeholders why we're not going to do these initiatives. You keep lobbing these initiatives over the fence for us to do, but I can tell you now why we're not going to do them, because when I map it all out, it doesn't solve these challenges we've just agreed that we need to solve for.
Yeah, so it's a good no saying method, right? I mean, because we always say if you say yes to everything, then you're saying no to everything at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the weakness for a lot of us in our industries is this inability to substantiate why not or why.